And in the center, the jewel of Southeast Asia, Hong Kong Island. A curious mixture of the modern metropolis and ancient Chinese culture, Hong Kong bustles with the activities of its 3 million inhabitants. Lately, Hong Kong has added a new excitement to its many attractions. It has become the film capital of the Far East. The one place in the world to make a motion picture called Enter the Dragon, about the explosive man-to-man fighting styles of the martial arts of Asia. The martial arts of Asia run the gamut from very rugged sport to deadly combat. They include karate, judo, hapkido, and kung fu. Motion pictures tied to the fighting styles of kung fu have become enormously popular around the world. And one of the major factors in this success has been Bruce Lee, master of the art of self-defense.
To spin hard, but a little bit off.
This is the first time a major American film company has come to Hong Kong to make a movie this size. One of the producers, Paul Heller, engages a huge cast and crew to work under the direction of Robert Klaus.
Action.
Martial arts experts come from all over the United States, Europe, and Asia. John Saxon, who becomes Bruce Lee's brother in battle. Jim Kelly, the international middleweight karate champion. Bob Wall, professional karate champion. Yang Tzi, Shotokan champion of Asia. And Angela Mono-Ying, black belt Hapkido champion of Okinawa. Co-producer Fred Weintraub has to cope with the language barriers of a multinational cast and crew. Sometimes 4 or 5 translators are used in a rehearsal. Among the Chinese in the company, there are many different dialects. Clearing the way through these translators, director Klaus and his crew prepare to film a lavish banquet. In the story, the trio of Bruce Lee, John Saxon, and Jim Kelly are on the trail of criminals who use a kung fu tournament to mask their crimes. The night before the deadly event, they are invited to a feast and entertainment for all the competitors. To capture some of the magic and wizardry of the Orient on film, meticulous planning is called for. When the ladies are ready, Klaus will shoot the sequence.
Action!
Fighting techniques are carefully choreographed by Bruce Lee and the director. Discipline and coordination are the only protection against possible lethal accident. Under this drive for perfection, Lee and the other actors put in over 12 hours of work to recreate a single kung fu sequence.
Cut.
Actresses from Hong Kong add a touch of the exotic to the film in the form of an ancient Chinese art. The tattooing will support the colorful mood of a scene that they'll shoot in a tea house. First, Bruce Lee runs through the grips and reflexes the girls will need to execute kung fu. Then they'll be ready to handle customer John Saxon.
They are my daughters.
Your daughters? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that I misunderstood. Miss Han?
For an illusion within an illusion, 8,000 mirrors are brought in to form a set. The cinematographer plans to film the violent but ballet-like action of Bruce Lee and Shun King in slow motion to give the scene a new dimension in action pictures. The director must confine the movement between the actor and the mirrors to hide all possible reflections of cameras and lights. It will take hours of coordination and planning before Robert Klaus and Bruce Lee are set. Martial Arts Academy forms the background for a dangerous and complicated fighting sequence. 200 students and masters will participate in an all-out battle. The company strives for the ultimate in authenticity. Exacting precision must be maintained. For one mistake of an inch or less will provide a disabling injury. Fatigue, produced by rehearsal after rehearsal, became the greatest danger. In Hong Kong, the greatest kung fu fighters in the world are keeping alert under the intense physical strain. There is no other way to make a motion picture called Enter the Dragon.
Bruce, when I first met him in Seattle, Washington, where I lived, and we both went to the University of Washington, he was teaching classes in Kung Fu, what he called Zhanfang Kung Fu. And I took lessons from him. And at that time, that was his dream, was to teach martial arts, to bring the beauty of his martial arts, Chinese Kung Fu, to the American people and to the world. And so he was starting on a very small basis there in Seattle, Washington. And that's how we came to know each other, and I fell in love with my instructor, so to speak. Opportunities were not open to him in Hollywood. And so he went, you might say, out the side door to Hong Kong, where he began to make films, which are now a matter of history, and came back into the United States film industry through the back door of Hong Kong. When Bruce taught Kung Fu, he did teach in small classes or one-on-one. He had dreamed, when I first met him in the early 60s, of having chains of schools across the country and teaching masses of people Chinese Kung Fu, which of course incorporates his beloved Chinese philosophy. As he proceeded to open a school in Seattle and then another in Oakland and a third in Los Angeles, he began to realize that this art was not something that could be taught on a mass scale. It had to be one-on-one or in very small groups in order to be not just taught by rigid set rules, which he opposed in the teaching of his Kung Fu and philosophy. It had to be suited to the individual, and the individual had to be able to take in and what he had to teach them and then grow individually from there. So he came to realize that his art could not be taught that way on a mass scale. And so he abandoned the idea of starting chains of Kung Fu schools and having assistant instructors in various locations all over the country, and instead continued to teach martial arts, Chinese Kung Fu, which by that time he had developed his own way and called Jeet Kune Do. He abandoned the idea of teaching that on a mass scale, continued to teach it one-on-one or in small groups, but changed his dream, you might say, of the way that he would translate and impart the message of his beautiful Chinese culture to the world. And this he would do through the vehicle of film. And I think that Bruce would be most proud to say, and to have people say about him, that he was a real human being who communicated the truth of his art through his actions and his presence on the screen. That people could look at him and say, wow, that guy was real. I know he could do that thing. He could make those moves. He would be deadly if he were in person right here in front of me. They knew that about him. Maybe they're not able to say that or express exactly what it was about him that turned them on so much or inspired them. But it was because he was the genuine article. He was that person in the films. He was not a different person off screen than he was on screen. He was vibrant and he was full of life, and he was the real thing. And I think that really comes across and inspires people to want to better themselves, be a better martial artist, a better person, a more real and genuine person. Whether or not this comes through actually in the films, this was part of Bruce's message of martial arts, is that violence is not the answer to every situation. And so while an emotion that may be aroused by a confrontational circumstance may lead to a violent reaction in a film, in our daily life, we need to be able to subvert that that outlet so that we can all get along in a humane way. So in Bruce's martial arts classes and in his writings and in his philosophy, he not only teaches the physical self-defense part of martial arts, but also the way to use martial arts as a mental self-defense. Enter the Dragon was not just another film for Bruce. It wasn't just, oh, this is the next project. This was the dream of his lifetime, to do this co-production, to introduce his Chinese culture and Chinese martial art to the world. It was his dream. He had been planning this in his mind for most of his life, in some way or another, especially in the last 5 or 10 years of his life. He'd been working up to this moment where he would be prepared. As he used to say, you know, opportunities may come your way or they may not. Luck may come your way or they may not. But if they come your way and you call that luck, you better be ready for it. He was planting the seed always for years prior to even going to Hong Kong, because he knew the producer Fred Weintraub, he knew the executive producer Ted Ashley, knew them well and intimately and on a one-to-one basis as far as teaching martial arts to them. So they were friends and students of Bruce's. So he was involved in every aspect from the very beginning of planning it, doing all the contractual things, making the arrangements for the people to come to Hong Kong for the production and everything, and very much involved in the writing of the script. Of course, there was a script that the first title of which was Blood and Steel, and it underwent numerous revisions by Bruce. He added a great deal of dialogue and scene changes because he knew what he wanted to produce here. And there was reluctance and tug of war going on about exactly how the product would end up, how the script would end up. But Bruce was very insistent, almost to the point of being difficult to work with, because he knew exactly what he wanted and he insisted on what he needed. Not to say he was bullheaded and wouldn't compromise on things. That's not the impression I want to give. The impression I want to give is that he had a goal in mind. He knew what he wanted to communicate martial arts wise, philosophically wise, through this film, and he was very determined to make his dream part of this movie, which I think is another reason why it has endured all these years. So he had a very active part in the writing of the script. He did, of course, choreograph all the fight scenes, and he was the best in the world at doing that. He had a film sense about how things would look on film, and he was exacting with his stunt people and the other actors that were in fight scenes with him. Nobody worked harder on Enter the Dragon than Bruce did. In the Far East, in Hong Kong, they had been making Chinese movies, of course, martial arts movies, for decades, if not longer, for as long as film was being made. So Chinese audiences were very sophisticated on what looked good and very vocal about expressing if they liked a martial arts scene or didn't like it. And so Bruce knew he had a very tough audience out there to please, and he also wanted to introduce it to Western audiences in a way that would set the standard. And I think there is no doubt that he did that. There were a couple of incidents that happened during the filming of Enter the Dragon that perhaps are not evident to the viewer because it's all pieced together nicely. But just for instance, so that you'll know when you see these films on camera, there is a scene where Bruce interacts with a cobra snake, and I don't know personally how he could ever do that, because I could not even be present on the set when this was happening. But and as you'll see in the film, this is a very large, ugly snake. And Bruce has to step on its tail and capture it by the head in order to subdue it. Well, in the finished version, you'll see everything went just fine and smoothly, and he does that with no problem. But that really wasn't the case during the filming. The snake was also somewhat angry because of all the runs he had been put through, and so this snake actually got quite nasty with Bruce and did, in fact, bite him. And it was painful, however, not deadly, because in fact the venom had been removed from this cobra, thank heavens, or the film may never have been finished. So, on another occasion, there is a fight scene you'll see in the movie where Bruce is fighting with Bob Wall. And this scene takes place in this vast courtyard with many martial artists dressed in white, which you will recognize in the film. And Bruce and Bob Wall are having this fight where Bob has a broken bottle in his hand. And in Hong Kong, they did not have the kind of breakaway props that they would have had in Hollywood. So this was a real broken glass bottle. And they're having this fight, and they had it carefully choreographed, who does what. And there was a slip-up during the filming of it, and consequently, one person didn't do what they were supposed to do. And consequently, Bruce's hand was severely cut across this tendon between the thumb and the forefinger. And filming had to stop, and it stopped for several days there, and Bruce had to have stitches, and his hand was all bandaged and swollen up. So that did put a stop to the film for a few days there. There was one extra on the set who I guess thought he would just see if Bruce was really a martial artist or was just an actor who was faking it. And he, between takes, when the extras are sitting around, standing around, and Bruce had a little time on his hands, one of these extras was goading Bruce all the time, like teasing him, like saying, you know, you're not any big stuff, I bet you can't do a sidekick, and da-da-da. And normally this kind of thing did not faze Bruce at all, because he had evolved to that stage of being a martial artist that did not need to prove himself to every person that came along issuing a challenge or teasing him or picking on him or anything. So he did not always feel the need to react in the way that the person would be hoping that he would. But on this occasion, and I happened to be there on the set that day, and on this occasion, this kid was trying to show Bruce up and say he was a paper tiger. And Bruce felt that it had reached the point where if he did nothing and said nothing, he would not be able to inspire the rest of the extras to cooperate with him in the fight scenes and do what they needed to do to complete the movie. So he felt he needed to take a leadership role and to show this young man that he was going to have to eat his words. So, but he did it in a nice and playful way, and he called the guy down from where he was sitting up on a wall, throwing jibes at Bruce, and he said, hey, come on down here, you know. So he brought him down, and in the martial arts vernacular, I guess you would say he played with the young man. And he said, you know, they got in a stance, and he said, okay, go ahead, you know, try and throw